Welcome to the Cult of the Clocktower. I am Andrew Nathenson. Every other week, a special guest and I have an in-depth discussion about a character from the game Blood on the Clocktower. Today's character is the Artist, a townsfolk from the Sects and Violets edition, whose ability reads, once per game, during the day, privately ask the Storyteller any yes or no question. Hello everybody, and welcome back to the show. Today I am joined by Kohava. Hey Kohava, how are you doing?
Hello.
Do you want to tell everyone a little bit about yourself and, all that stuff?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of people probably know me as Kohava on the unofficial server. I'm probably one of the newest people you've had on the podcast, but I sort of found it and then got super obsessed and played a lot of it online. Yeah, I don't know. Is there anything else people usually say, I think?
No, I think that's good. I feel like a lot of people are on the unofficial Discord and such, so they'll already be familiar with you.
Yes. Hello, everybody.
But for anyone who isn't, Kohava is a very good player of this game, knows a lot about it and all that stuff.
I guess I should say that I have played a lot more than I have storytold, and I've never actually storytold S&V. So this, from the storyteller perspective, today will mostly be Andrew.
Yeah, that is a good point. So let's start with a brief overview of how to run the Artist. Oh, by the way, that's the character we're talking about. I guess you heard it in the intro to the episode, but I haven't said it yet. We're talking about the Artist. So the how to run for the Artist is very simple. It pretty much just does exactly what it says. The Artist, during the day, comes up to the Storyteller in private, asks a question, and the Storyteller gives a truthful answer, unless, of course, there's a Vortox in play, in which case you give a false answer, and you must give a false answer. But if they're drunk or poisoned, and there's no Vortox, then you can give them an arbitrary answer, whatever you feel like. And in the actual Storyteller section, we can get more into, like when to tell the truth, when to lie to a poisoned artist, and all that stuff. But yeah, there's not really much more to it than that. It must be a yes or no question. Yeah, think that's about it as far as how to run the Artist.
Yeah,
it's very simple.
Pretty straightforward from the storyteller's perspective.
Yeah. So let's get right into it then, playing as the Artist. So, you are the Artist in a Sects and Violets game. What are you thinking of going into the game? What are your plans for the game? How are you thinking about using your ability?
I would say I'm thinking I want to survive until a point where my question will narrow down the game, right?
Yeah.
So the Artist is so strong, but but if you use your question too early, you're not going to be able to have enough information to be able to narrow down, use it in a very useful way. But also, if you don't use it and you die, that's you don't have an ability anymore.
Right.
So that's the thing with once per game abilities, right? You want to use it correctly.
Yeah, and it's like you're powerful because of your flexibility, not because your ability is particularly strong. It's just very flexible. Like, there are lots of characters who get the equivalent of Artist information every night.
Right.
But the Artist can use it at the most important point in time and use the exact correct ability, more or less, for that situation.
Yeah, and so I guess I would also add that you need to know what's going on in the game as the Artist if you're going to use your question in a very helpful way. So I would be trying to get myself in some sort of group of trust or in some sort of information flow so that I know sort of what the general worldviews are when I ask my question, so I don't use it on something that other people already know.
Yeah, that's a good point. The Artist in particular is fairly useless if you're outside the loop of the game, because you might just figure out something that everyone already knows.
Yep.
Yeah, whereas the other characters, it's if you're not in the loop, at least eventually you can be brought into the loop and your information will be helpful, and it's not that changes your information. But the Artist, you actually have to adapt your information to the game state.
Yeah, exactly.
Before we go over more of the stuff about playing as the Artist, I think it's worth bringing up a couple of things. One being the most common meta surrounding the Artist, which is Vortox check, and the other one being a little trick that you can use with the Artist to get around the Vortox. Anything else you want to bring up before we go into those things?
No, I think those are right off the bat the things you have to think about when you're the Artist.
Right. So the first one is Vortox check. So many people have realized that the artist can figure out if there's a Vortox, or at least figure out if they're poisoned or there's a Vortox, by asking the storyteller the question, am I the artist? Or something else, just some true statement that they know for sure is true, and the answer should be yes, or vice versa. And if you get the answer that clearly isn't the correct answer, then you know, hey, it's a Vortox or I'm drunk or poisoned. And in many online groups, and we've talked about this before on the show, but there's a strong meta that this is just like what the artist does and is what it is used for. I think in like the intro episode, I've made it pretty clear that my personal stance on this is that this is usually not the optimal play, but you know, everything has its place. So what are your thoughts on the Vortox check meta?
Yeah, I think the artist is like the strongest role in the game, because you can get a lot. You can use it to get, like, you could ask a question that's like seamstress info, or you can ask like a question that like completely shrinks it into like one of two possible scenarios, or even you can solve the game. And I think using it to narrow down which of the four demons it is can be helpful, but it is also not, like, it's not always the best play. I would agree about that. And also, the artist is a once per game ability, and you have some ongoing info roles that can also do Vortox checks, so that it won't be the be all and end all of their ability, right? So the Flower Girl and the Town Crier and the Dreamer are all characters that can sort of get information about if there's a Vortox in play or not. Town Crier is specifically when you have an evil twin pair. I
mean, yeah, I think that the thing with the Vortox is you usually figure out the Vortox by a culmination of a lot of different sources telling you that it's probably a Vortox.
Right, yeah.
And so for that reason, I feel like it's usually like using the artist question on it is kind of overkill. Like, it's like confirming that it's a Vortox, but I feel like usually in that situation, you can just work on the assumption that it's a Vortox.
When it might be a good idea to check if it's a Vortox is if it's later in the game and you have some information that the demon has changed, and you want to know what kind of demon it is now, then I would be more... Because, you know, that demon change can throw a wrench into everyone's information. So that's when I would consider maybe checking for a Vortox.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And that's just like an example of using the artist ability to fit the situation. If you're always using it to Vortox check on like the first day, then the artist just becomes a character whose ability says you start knowing whether or not there's a Vortox in play. And like, if you think about it, that's not a very powerful character.
Or you're next to an Odashi.
Right, yeah. So yeah, I would definitely say like using it later when you think the demon's changed is a good example of adapting to the situation. Using it always on the first day is like sometimes that'll be very useful, but a lot of the time it won't be.
Yeah, but I do want to say that like if this is like one of your first times playing S&V and you just got artist and you're like, oh my god, I'm overwhelmed, I can literally do anything with my ability, going to the storyteller and asking if you're the artist is providing your team with tangible, useful information.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
That's like the baseline.
I guess that's probably part of the reason why so many people do it, is because like it's a very easy thing to do and it always feels useful. Because it always is useful. It's just maybe not, like, the opportunity cost is the problem with it, not
right,
that it's actually bad.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, so I think that's good on that. I guess my main point would be that the artist is usually outclassed by other characters in terms of Vortox checking. Like the Flower Girl, if you just get everyone to vote, can Vortox check but also keep getting information. The Dreamer usually just like will figure out that there's a Vortox fairly quickly. Yeah, you said some others, but there's
yeah, and the Juggler can also do it if they didn't get enough people's roles and they can just juggle themselves. That's another way.
And for the Juggler, it's a little bit better maybe to do that because there isn't quite as much of an opportunity cost because the Juggler is inherently less flexible. Although I would still argue that that's often not the best use of a Juggler ability, but that's more of a Juggler topic.
Yeah, well, I mean, while we were listing other characters that can Vortox check. Right,
yeah. It can often be good to, like, I'm totally fine with doing an explicit Vortox check, but I would much prefer to do it with a Flower Girl or Town Crier. Where you can have everyone vote or everyone nominate. it's a little bit tedious to have everyone nominate. But if you got to do it.
That's why I said if it's an evil twin game, you just have
Right,
both of the twin pair nominate, and then you've
That's
definitely had
true.
a minion.
Yeah. Unless, good players are doing some weird bluffing. But yeah. All right, so let's move on to the next thing that we should talk about before we really talk about what the artist does, which is a little trick you can use to get around the Vortox. And I see you have a note here about the question of whether this is against the spirit of the game. We can talk about that in a second, but I want to just outline what this is first. So this is something that really appeals to me because I tend to be I think in terms of formal logic like this. The artist basically just you can phrase your question in such a way that you can use logical tricks to get manipulate the information you get out of it. So I have 3 formulations of this type of question that allow you to ask a question in such a way that you get a true answer regardless of whether or not there's a Vortox. And all of these are equivalent to each other. Any of them works. You can just use whichever one you understand the most or are most comfortable with. 2 of them are really the same thing. But so the most basic way to do this is to use an XOR statement. And if you're not familiar with what that is, it's asking a question with an OR in it, where basically you say, is A true or is B true? And if exactly one of those is true, if A is true but not B, or if B is true but not A, then that would be a true statement. Or the answer would be yes. But if both A and B are true, then the answer would be no, because it's exclusive OR. The answers are exclusive to each other. That's what X stands for in XOR. And if neither is true, then it's just false. So in that situation, you get a yes if exactly one of them is true. So the way you would phrase that is by saying to the storyteller, if they're comfortable with this, you can say, all right, I'm using an exclusive OR statement here. And if they're like, what the heck does that mean? Then you should use one of the other formulations. If they're cool with that, and if they've heard of this trick before, then they'll probably be like, okay, cool, go for it. Where you can basically say, so let's say the thing I really want to find out is Kohava evil? So I could ask the question.
Always good to know. Always good to know.
So I could ask the question, all right, storyteller, I'd like to ask this question as an exclusive OR. Is there a Vortox alive, or is Kohava evil? And if they don't know what exclusive OR is, you can say, is exactly one of the following statements true? Kohava is evil, or there is a Vortox alive. Now, if you examine that logically, the reason this will always tell me with certainty, barring drunk or poison, which, is a pretty big exception, but it at least gets around Vortox. The reason it'll tell me without ignoring Vortox, basically, is because in the situation where there is no Vortox, then the answer to my question is just the answer to, is Kohava evil? Because the first part always is false. There's not a Vortox. So really, my answer is just, is Kohava evil? If there is a Vortox, then the answer to the first part is true. And then let's say Kohava is evil, then the second part is also true. And with an exclusive OR, that evaluates to false, right? Because if both parts are true, then the whole thing is false. And then Vortox flips it again. So basically, if there's a Vortox alive, you end up with a double negative. And you will still get the answer of yes, Kohava is evil. If she's not evil, then a similar thing happens, and you get a double negative that flips it around to no. You can work out the logic for that on your.
It helps if you draw some diagrams.
Yeah. If you're not convinced by that, then feel free to work it out for yourself. Spend some time thinking about it, or you can just trust me that it does work. Although your storyteller will have to also kind of know how it works because it's not immediately intuitive. But the long and short of it is, if I ask the question that way, I will learn whether or not Kohava is evil, regardless of if there's a Vortox in the game. If I'm drunk or poisoned, then, I can get any answer. But, yeah. The other alternative to ask this, which might be easier for some of you, but some storytellers aren't comfortable with this type of question because it is, I forget what it's called, counterfactual. It's basically like a hypothetical question. You can ask, would you say yes if I asked you, is Kohava evil? And that does the same thing where the would you say yes? If it's not a Vortox game, that doesn't do anything because that's just like, tell me the answer to this question. But if it's a Vortox game, then that's like a double negative again, where it's, okay, so the answer to the question is no, but the answer to would you say yes is also no, and like the Vortox flips it. Just, you can do the math on it for yourself again. So that's the other formulation. This is all a long way of saying there is a way to use the artist question to ask a question in such a way that whether or not there's a Vortox, you always get your answer. Cool. Did that make any sense?
I mean, I already knew everything you were saying, so I really can't tell you if it makes sense to someone who's hearing it for the first time.
Hopefully, if it didn't make sense, they can go through it and, work it out for themselves.
Yeah.
So now to the question of whether this is against the spirit of the game. I strongly believe that it's totally fine, but I'm curious what you think about it.
I don't know. I feel like it's getting kind of convoluted. Like, I don't know whether as a storyteller I would let the question in or not. I feel like some storytellers feel like it's sort of cheating, but like you're using it. It's all logically valid. It's just sort of, it just feels underhanded in some way, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree that I mean, to me, it doesn't feel underhanded. It just feels like clever. So maybe that's where the difference lies. I would argue that pretty strongly that this is totally acceptable for two main reasons. The biggest one, I think, is that trying to write the rules in such a way that this isn't allowed makes it so that the rules of the game become very complicated and murky.
Yes, yep.
So I think that just like from a simplicity perspective, even though, yes, this is a complicated question, I think that would be much more complicated to disallow this specific case, especially because I gave like 3 basic formulations of this question. There are other ways to formulate this question that are even more complicated than those. So like it's really hard to prevent somebody from using a question like this. And the other thing I would say that in favor of allowing this is I don't think that this question is particularly powerful. I don't think that this is more powerful than an artist asking a question without doing this. It's another tool, so it makes them a little bit more flexible. But I don't think that anything about, like, even though, yes, this information is more reliable in a sense, it doesn't give you any information about whether or not there is a Vortox. So, like, usually when you ask an artist question, you get your answer to your question, but you also get a clue about whether or not Vortox is in play. And if you figure out that there is a Vortox, then it's very easy to just flip your information.
Yeah, I see what you mean, and I see you are losing out on some level of information by like making your question Vortox proof.
Yeah.
But also, like, you are making it a little bit easier for you to think about things, because when you normally ask a question, you sort of have to hold 2 worlds in your mind, right? If there is a Vortox, this is my answer, and if there is not, then this is my answer.
Yeah, that's fair. I think yeah, the biggest thing is just like I don't see any reason this wouldn't be allowed, like, explicitly within the rules, and I don't expect them to change the rules. So whether or not it's against the spirit of the game, I think it is a part of the game.
Every storyteller should be aware of this possibility at the very least.
And I mean, if they wanted to, like, if everyone's on board with it, the storyteller could even just say, like, hey, I don't want you to have to, like, fumble around with, like, formulating your question in this specific way. Just tell me if you want to use a Vortox proof artist question. Which maybe that, like, I don't know, maybe that's more against the spirit of the game, because that is actually bending the rules a little bit. Maybe if the artist wants to use this question, like, the onus is on them to explain to the group how they managed to come up with a Vortox proof artist question.
Yeah, that's true. Your downside is you have to teach people XOR in the middle of a Blood on the Clocktower game.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I guess I'm going to work on the assumption that this is totally fine, and it's just a part of the game. And that's how I think about using artist now, is including this kind of use of the ability. So yeah, I will totally use this when I need to know for sure if something is true. I will absolutely use this. But yeah, so those are the 2 big things that we wanted to talk about as far as, like, I don't know, I guess, like, pieces of artist tech, right? Like the Vortox check or the Vortox proof.
Things you should know before you encounter the artist.
Yeah. Now let's get into a little bit more of, like, the normal discussion, the strategy stuff, like how to actually use these ideas and other questions to ask, because it is such a broad topic, of course. You can ask any kind of question, but what are good ones to ask?
So, yeah, one thing you can always ask is, because, the game is all about killing the demon, you can ask if some amount of people are the demon. This can be helpful if you find a flower girl and you can coordinate with them. I've seen artists who narrows down the demon plus flower girl who narrows down the demon can just like, we know it's like one of these two people, so they just kill them both and win. So that can be very strong. I also mentioned if there's no town crier or you want another confirmation, you can use your artist question to figure out which is the good twin.
Yeah.
Because that's just a binary yes or no, and then you don't have to worry about that for the rest of the game.
Yeah, I will say on the first thing you brought up, that finding the demon, there are a lot of ways to go about that. The common one is just like to divide the circle in half. But that's not your only way. You can always just like make an explicit list of people, like is one of these three people the demon? If you're like playing in real life, you can always ask something like, is the demon wearing orange? I don't know, something.
Yeah, that's just more fun.
It is more fun, yeah. Because then you have to get into arguments with people like, no, Brian's totally wearing orange, I'm telling you. Like that color is not orange, that's dark.
I don't know, could the storyteller see his socks? Because they've got rainbows on them.
Yeah, that's not orange, that's dark yellow.
Okay, maybe don't ask this question if you're the artist.
I think it's
take
fun.
That back.
I've given information to the savant before that it involves color, and it's always very funny, and I end up getting a lot of clarifying questions.
Your poor savant.
Yeah, and then the thing with the twins, that's an example of a situation where you might want to use the Vortox proof question.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Although you don't have to. Like sometimes it's fine to know like this person's a twin unless there's a Vortox. Sometimes that's fine.
Yeah, I guess a lot of these will come down to it depends on the game state at the time you ask your question.
Exactly. We're just here to help give some examples, I guess, of game states where you might want to use certain questions. Yeah,
I see you also wrote a couple other ones that I like. Just asking if a single person is the demon. So that's sort of like a Vortox check, but if someone else tells you it's not a Vortox, then you know this single person is the demon.
Right, yeah, actually, that is something I probably should have brought up in the Vortox check thing. I think that this is a kind of just like, in most situations, this is a better Vortox check, because it's like, yes, it can fail to check whether there's a Vortox, but if it fails, then you know who the demon is, and that's usually enough information to win on. So yeah, just asking like, is so-and-so the demon? Very, very powerful question in the sense that it's like a Vortox check. Not necessarily that powerful if you don't care about whether or not there's a Vortox. I guess another one that I really like is confirming that another good character is getting true info. Because this simultaneously does a few things. It confirms that somebody is good, and it confirms that their information is good. So if somebody else has like a grand theory of the game, like there's a savant or a dreamer who thinks they have everything figured out, then confirming whether or not that person is telling the truth and whether their info is correct can tell you whether or not to buy into that theory. So a good question like that could be like, is John actually the savant, and has their ability worked normally throughout the game? It's the sort of thing where, like, if this wasn't Sects and Violets, then I feel like this would be a bad question, because it's possible for them to like be poisoned on one night or drunk on one night or something. But in Sects and Violets, people are generally like getting true information the whole game if they're getting true information.
Depending on a couple factors,
right.
But those are usually more traceable.
Yeah, so like, yeah, Nodashi moving around or Sweetheart or something might make you not want to ask this question.
I mean, but you could even ask, like, if you think they got poisoned on like night 2 onwards, you could ask, are they actually the savant, and did they get true info on nights 1 and 2?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, if those particular pieces of savant info are the most important ones, you think.
Yeah, I guess like this question sort of illustrates that the more things you add onto your question, the more things, are they the savant and are they getting true info? Mm-hmm. The more powerful a yes is, but at the same time, a no is telling you less and less.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. I think that you want to use that situation when you expect the answer to be a yes, and you're more confirming something that you already think is good enough to win you the game.
Yeah.
I was thinking of this one also in context of Laissez Unfair, which is the Teensyville script that they released a while ago, if anyone isn't familiar with that. I've only played a few games of it, but in the games where there's been an artist, I've seen a question like this asked a lot. And it makes a lot of sense in Laissez Unfair because there's just so much information there, and like confirming one other player is really powerful. But I think it also extends to Sects and Violets that this can be quite good.
Yeah, I agree. At like that point, you're basically sort of asking, is this worldview correct?
Yeah.
Right? Which is what you're really doing with the artist. You're trying to go into the storyteller with your question and use it to sort of collapse the wave function of worldviews.
Nice, yeah.
That's my nerdy metaphor for the day.
I think that if you're thinking about it in those terms, then the number of executions remaining in the game can influence your question. So for instance, if you have 2 executions left, most likely, obviously things like witch or whatever can get in the way of that. But if you think you have 2 executions left, then asking a question that narrows it down to exactly 2 worldviews is totally acceptable. If you only have 1 execution left, then you should probably try to narrow it down to 1 worldview. If you're earlier in the game than that, then maybe you just want to cut out like half of the possibilities. So like the specificity of your question, I think, should depend on how late you are into the game.
Right, which I guess comes to the point of when do you ask your question?
Yeah, okay. Let's talk about that.
So an analog for the artist is in Trouble Brewing I wrote is like the Slayer, right? You have a powerful once per game ability you can use basically any time during the daytime, and it gets better the longer you hold on to it. So if you think about it in that case, like the Slayer taking a shot on day 1, probably not going to hit the demon. The artist asking their question on day 1 is probably not going to solve the game. But when you die at night, as either of those characters, you really feel like you've wasted a very powerful ability. So, like, if you're coming into S&V with only Trouble Brewing knowledge, I'd say thinking of the artist sort of like the Slayer is not going to steer you that wrong.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good analog. Like, it even extends to, like, you can use your ability when you're about to be executed.
Right, because pro tip for all you artists out there, you can ask the storyteller to talk at any time. Try not to, like, completely disrupt the game. Like, don't do it in the middle of a vote or a nomination, but most storytellers, if you're about to get executed, are okay with you pulling them aside and asking an artist question.
Yeah, and so that with that in mind, you don't have to preemptively use your ability because you're afraid of being executed. You can use it when you're sure you're going to be executed.
So, but that still doesn't really tell you when to ask your question. Like, I don't know, just sort of, sometimes you really want to hold on to it. Sometimes you got to risk it.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference between Slayer and Artist is that the Artist ability is occasionally more useful when you use it early. Well, although I guess that's also true of Slayer, because like Slayer, if you use it early, then you rule out 1 demon candidate. But with the Artist, it's not just, you can possibly rule out half of the demon candidates, and that's more useful to do early on than later, I think.
And the Artist is also private, and the Slayer is public. So the Slayer slays someone, they're not the demon, but everyone knows that, and they're just going to die, right?
Yeah.
At night, probably. But the Artist, you know people who aren't the demon, but you don't have to tell people that. So there is that as well.
Yeah, that is true. You get a piece of information that nobody else knows. So if you narrow down half the demon candidates and then the demon kills everyone but themselves on that side that you asked about, then that's going to be pretty good for you.
Yeah, I guess it's up to you when to ask your question. I've seen artists sort of slip under the radar and ask it later in the game. I've seen artists get killed without using their question. Just sort of, if you're really scared that you're going to die, you can just ask it, and you're just going to get some good information.
Yeah.
But it can be so strong if you can somehow stay alive until late in the game and use it to just figure out exactly what's going on.
And you have a good point here in the notes, which is that there is no spy in Sects and Violets, so you're a little bit more likely to survive than the Slayer is.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, because in TB, if there's a Slayer late into the game and there's a spy in the game, the spy is going to know, like, okay, this is a good time to kill the Slayer, and they'll be able to communicate that to the demon. On the topic of using the ability early, there's something I wanted to bring up, which is a very specific play you can make that I like, and that is using your first... You can use your question on the first day and then use that to bluff Savant really convincingly. So, for instance, you can ask your question, you learn something that is true or false about the game. And then you can rephrase that into a savant statement where that is your true piece of information. So you can like say you asked like is there an evil person among these three people or something? I don't know how useful that question is, but that's something you could ask that the evil team would know whether or not it's true. And if you ask that, you get a yes or you get a no, then you can come back and say, okay, my savant information is either there is a evil player among these three players, or there's a mutant in play, or something like that, where the second part is something that it's hard for the evil team to verify. And I feel like if you have some specific piece of information like that, they're going to trust you a little bit more as a savant. Now, obviously, it's a little bit weird to just come out and claim savant right away, but you could say, like, well, I feel like this is important enough for me to bring it up right away, that one of these people is evil, so we need to focus on that. And if you can do that, then I just think it's a pretty convincing savant bluff because you've talked to the storyteller has clearly said stuff to you, and you have this true piece of information that the evil team can verify. So it might be a good way to get yourself killed after using your ability while possibly even protecting the real savant.
Yeah, and adding on to that, I also wrote, after you ask your question, if you're not saying your information immediately, if it's something that you're keeping sort of close to your chest, keep talking to the storyteller every day. And the evil team might think you're the savant because you've had these conversations with the storyteller every day. And maybe you'll die at night after using your question.
Yeah. On a similar note, if you have used your question, or if you haven't used your question, it still can be a good idea to go talk to the storyteller during the day. That way you can come back and say, yeah, I'm the artist. I used my ability to get an answer, but I don't want the evil team to know what the answer is. Like I know where the demon is or something, but I don't want them to know because then they will know not to like kill those other players. So you can just totally pretend that you've asked a question when you haven't yet, and then that'll make the demon not want to kill you at night.
Bluffing as a used artist, as an unused artist.
Right, yeah. Which, I mean, is totally... I mean, it's a bluff that you know you're not going to be like counterclaiming anyone, so it's a relatively safe thing to do.
Yeah, that's true. And I guess if you have asked your question, you can always say you haven't, and maybe you'll die. There's two sides to that coin.
Yeah, so in general, it's just a good play pattern to go to the storyteller every day as the artist. It just gives you options. I can think of one other situation where I would learn something and I wouldn't want to tell everyone what it is, other than just like narrowing down the demon or whatever and hoping that they kill the other candidates. And that is the situation where I want to extract some useful information out of somebody that I know is lying. If I'm doing the thing where I say, like, is so-and-so actually a good player? And I just want to know if I can trust them. Like, say there's a dreamer, and I'm like, okay, dreamer is incredibly powerful, so I want to go figure out if I can trust them. And if I learn that dreamer is evil, and they're actually a minion or a demon or whatever, then by talking to them, I might be able to get them to give their demon a bluff. Like, say they... So say it's the first day, the dreamer comes out, or I hear about them in private, and I then use my question, and I figure out that they're evil. If I then, in future days, if they call somebody out and say like, hey, I saw that you were a seamstress, or whatever, and that person hasn't said anything yet, well, an evil player doesn't actually have a way to know that that person is a seamstress. So the only way for them to call it out like that is if they've heard it, or if that's an evil player that they're giving a bluff to. So you can sometimes use it to figure out that they're an evil player giving other evil players bluffs or something like that.
Yeah, just in general, if you know if someone is evil, but they think you still trust them, it's always good to try and figure out what worldview they're spinning. Yeah. Like, what are they trying to convince you of? That can sort of help you backtrack and figure out what is actually going on.
Yeah, exactly. And the artist is often one of the characters that is in the best position to do that because, like any other character, the other players will kind of know like what is the possible space of things that you could learn. So the evil players will kind of know how careful they have to be around you. But if everyone thinks you're the artist and they don't know what question you used yet, then they don't necessarily know whether or not they have to be guarded around you. Anything else about playing as the artist that you wanted to talk about?
I have one point that just says, if absolutely no one is willing to die on the first day, like you don't have a clockmaker, everyone's powerful roles, and they're like, oh, I'm not willing to be Vortox, executed for the Vortox. you can always resign yourself to the fact that it's going to be you, ask your question, and get yourself executed. If you're worried that you're just about to lose on day one because no one's getting executed.
Yeah, alternatively, in that situation, you can use your question to try to find someone to execute.
Just like, is A or B a good target for us to execute today?
That is an interesting point, actually. The kind of subjective questions, which I think are allowed. I don't know. That's.
I mean, when you're asking when you're asking for the storyteller's opinion, I would advise against that just in general, because you want to use logic to solve the game. You don't want to have to also meta the storyteller.
Yeah. But yeah, I was thinking in terms of finding someone to execute, like just saying like, all right, one of these two people evil or something like that. That just gives you some targets. Because the thing is, on the first day, I think in Sects and Violets, you usually have not very much information to go on. So you often will end up wasting that execution on a good player or just, I don't know, on a random player. So actually, that is another point in favor of like using your question on the first day to just add some more direction for that first execution. Otherwise, you're kind of wasting the execution. So you get a little bit of extra value using your artist question on the first day, I think, just to give you a good execution target.
Yeah, that's all I had to say on that. I just wanted to mention that because I've seen games of Sects and Violets where no one wants to get executed on the first day. We're like, we have to kill someone, and then we just like kill the town crier, and then we're down a very important info roll. So
yeah, you can at least get your info out there before you die as artist. I have a couple of minor points that aren't really about strategy or anything. One is that try to ask about things that you think the storyteller has actually like kept track of. So if you ask about like, okay, 2 days ago, did the demon vote? The storyteller might not know that offhand, and there might not be any way for them to figure it out, especially if you're playing in person.
Yeah, the storyteller is allowed to tell you, I don't know.
Right.
And you don't want to put yourself in a position where the storyteller can say that, because that's just not fun for you or them, really.
Yeah, so try to ask about things that you know the storyteller should know. The other thing to watch out for is don't ever ask questions that you always will know will be answered a certain way. So don't ask if someone is the Vortox, because the answer will always be no, even if they are the Vortox.
Or just even asking if a Vortox is the current demon.
Yes.
Like, you're always going to get a no.
Yep. I have seen that one done before, and yeah, when people realize that it gives them no useful information at all, it's always very funny for me as the storyteller, but not so much for them as a player.
Yeah, I guess before you ask your question, if you're not Vortox proofing it, just think to yourself, is this going to give me useful information if it is or is not a Vortox game? Just like that's a general check you can do with your question.
That's actually, you can Vortox proof a question about whether or not Vortox is in play. Wait, is that true? Can you do that? Is that possible?
I don't want to have to think about that right now.
Is exactly one of these true? There's a Vortox in play?
No. It would be, would you say yes if I asked if the Vortox was in play? I think that would work. I'm not going to try and puzzle that out on a live podcast. I'll do that later.
This question is left as an exercise to the reader. The listener. All right, let's move on into section 2 here, which is bluffing as the artist. Do you want to start off with bluffing as a good player?
Yeah, I think the artist is a pretty great thing to bluff when you're good, because the artist can ask any question. So you can just tailor the artist question to the information that you already have. If you're a flower girl, you can say, I asked if these people were the demon. If you're the seamstress, I asked if these people were the same alignment. So it's a pretty good catch-all for getting out your information without telling Evil Team what role you are. And it can be a very useful bluff is good. Which is the same if the Serenovus is you into claiming that you are the artist, then you can still get your information out pretty easily.
Yeah. And for that reason, I think that artist is one of the worst things to target people with as the Serenovus, because it usually just doesn't add that much confusion to the game. Yeah.
So I guess it's just not a bad call if if you have information that you want to get out there, but you can't claim your role for whatever reason, like you're an ongoing info role and you want people to not kill you at night, or you just want to make the evil team really confused, you can just claim artist and get your info out there that way.
Yeah, it's kind of the inverse of what I was saying earlier, where you use your artist question to bluff savant. Now you can use any info roll to bluff artist in a similar way with convincing information.
Yeah, make sure you talk to the storyteller if you're going to bluff artist, though. Because some people are watching for that, and if you come out as artist and people are like, but you never talk to the storyteller, that might get you in a bit of trouble.
I wrote them a message, and they have communicated the answer to me with eye movements. Yeah, no, absolutely. Another situation where you might not want to tell the information that you have is if the information you have is that you are the mutant.
Oh, yes, I wrote this down. I've done this in a game before. So if you're in a game where there should not be any outsiders, so that's 7, 10, or 13 player game, and you pick the mutant out of the bag, you know it's a Fangu game. So at this point, you have two options. You can play for good and try and get yourself killed so you can't get jumped to. Or you can play for evil and resign yourself to the fact that you're going to get jumped at some point.
Yeah.
If you're going to play for the good team, a pretty good bluff, because you can't claim that you're an outsider and want to get yourself executed, is to claim to be the artist that Vortox checked, because you know it's a Fangu game, so you know it's not a Vortox. Mm-hmm. So if you claim to be the artist that Vortox checked and get yourself executed on day one, that sort of gives information to your team. It makes it so the Fangu can't hit you because you're dead, and the storyteller won't execute you because you're not claiming an outsider role.
Yeah, so it's a way to get yourself executed by the town rather than having to rely on the storyteller maybe or maybe not confirming your bluff. I mean, obviously it's not a bluff, but but if you just come out as the mutant, it might make you more suspicious if the storyteller doesn't kill you, right?
Yeah, I don't. Would I kill a mutant if they just came out and they're the only outsider in Fangu game? I think not. I think that would be hilarious to leave them alive.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing you can do is you can just say that your artist info somehow indicates that there is exactly a Fangu in play, or that there is a mutant in play. You sometimes will get into territory where it's like the artist would never actually ask that question, therefore it feels like you're a mutant. Like, say you asked, like, oh, my artist question was, is there a mutant in play? Because most of the time that's not an artist question that you would come up with out of the blue. So...
yeah, that's towing a line.
Yeah.
But then again, if you want to get yourself executed by the storyteller for claiming mutant,
yeah,
you can subtly do it that way and
maybe.
see if they'll kill you.
Yeah. That's one of my favorite things about the mutant, is trying to bait the storyteller into doing what you want.
I guess the last thing I had for being a good character and claiming artist is just sort of tangentially, I love the artist and the savant a lot because they encourage you to go interact with the storyteller. So when you're good or when you're evil, just having the artist or the savant on a script gives you reason to go chat with the storyteller, tell them what you're thinking. Especially when you're evil, the storyteller really likes knowing what you're bluffing and what your plans are, so that they can help you craft that narrative. But when you're good, it can hurt to tell the storyteller exactly what you're thinking, but it can also help the storyteller have a better idea of what's going on in the game if you tell them what you're thinking. So just talk to the storyteller, guys. It almost always is a good idea.
Yeah, like I've had a game recently where I was the storyteller and good players came up to me, or like I entered a private chat because it was online. I entered a chat with a bunch of good players. They didn't obviously know that all of them were good. But then they were like, please be nice to us, storyteller. We have no idea what's happening in this game. And I knew that they were actually like very close to figuring out the game, but it was still helpful to know that that was like what they were thinking about the game.
Yeah. So just even if you're not the artist or the savant and you don't plan on bluffing artist or savant, it's not a bad idea to talk to the storyteller.
Yeah. So let's talk about bluffing the artist as an evil player. I think this is generally This is a situationally strong thing to do, I think, because you can give such specific information.
Yeah. It's just the artist is just so strong as good. So if you can use it when you're evil and use it to construct the wrong worldview, then that's pretty strong too.
Yeah, if you can eliminate all the worldviews in which your demon is the demon, then that's great.
Yeah, the first thing I wrote here was just, it is a very, if this hasn't happened in your group yet, and you're still on the Vortox check meta, it's a very strong minion bluff to claim artist that did a Vortox check on the first day, and then say we don't need to execute anyone, it's not a Vortox, I use my artist question to check, and then just win the game because you're evil and it's a Vortox. So, like, never rule that one out.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing that'll be especially helpful if other characters seem to have good information. Like, if the whole evil team comes out, like, on the first day, all of them having information and all of the information seems to be true, then I feel like this is a lot more likely to work.
Or even if the dreamer just got unlucky and dreamed an evil player as a bluff.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, it's always something to watch out for. There will be times when this is more likely to work than others.
Yeah. And then, yeah, it's just push whatever narrative you want. One time, there was like, I was Fangu jumped, and then my Fangu claimed to be an artist that died in the night, and pointed to everyone who wasn't me as the demon, and that was just like super helpful. So
yeah. I feel like it's especially, I mean, this is true of just most things, but once you're dead, you tend to be more trustworthy. But if you can like claim to be the artist who used your ability and then baited the demon into killing you, that can be a pretty strong thing to say, especially if it's a Vigor Mortis game. But even if it's not, if it's just like, I don't know, towards the end of the game, you think that killing a minion is worth it.
Or if you're a pit hag death.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, the thing to keep in mind is that if you are claiming that you're a used artist and you're not okay with being executed, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
So, and then if you're also claiming to be the artist but won't ever use your ability, that's also a red flag.
Yep.
So be careful that once you say that you've asked your question, people are just going to be like, so you're willing to die now, right? So there is that.
Yeah, and that's the sort of thing that you can absolutely push back on.
Yeah, you can be like, but I'm a good player, and I've got good info, and my info is pointing to these people.
Yeah.
If you execute me, like, that's just killing a good person, and we should really be thinking about these. Like, you can always say things.
Yeah,
but
I guess the one thing to keep in mind in that situation is don't necessarily give artist information that, like, points to exactly one player if there's enough time to execute both of you.
I mean, if you're a minion, that's not the end of the world. True. But if you're the demon, just be careful. Although, on that note, I also have here that demons shouldn't necessarily be completely avoiding top 4 or once per game ability bluffs, because, I don't know, maybe it's just me and the people I've been playing with recently, but there's this meta that has developed where people who are just willing to die and nominate themselves and push for their own execution, people are like, oh no, now we trust you. We're not going to kill you. You push so hard for your own execution. You got to be good. So I'm just waiting for a minion or demon to pull that and then just get trusted for the rest of the game. So again, this would be a very risky bluff, but I feel like it would just have huge payoffs if you just nominate yourself and go, all right, I'm a used artist. We should kill me today, and like push hard for your own death. Because, and now you have to know your group, because some groups will just be like, all right, let's do it. But some groups will be like, no, they wouldn't do that if they were evil. They've got to be good. So
so I will say that I personally am one of the people who will often push to not execute people who want to kill themselves. But I'm also very aware that I'm always trying to be aware of whether or not I'm misreading the group, but I think I feel like in most of the games I've played in, whenever somebody pushes to execute themselves, they're almost always good. And I'm just waiting for the day that like the group meta catches up to that, and yeah, it turns around like you're saying.
It's high risk, but like super high reward. So someone try that out and get back to me.
Yeah. You can also kind of you can, like, if somebody's pushing for their own execution, and then you can convince everyone, okay, we 100% trust this person. If they stay alive for too long after that, then you might want to start suspecting them again, because typically the evil team wants to kill the trusted
players. But if they're claiming once per game used ability, why would the demon kill them?
Yeah, exactly. It's a trade-off. Yeah, so that's Bluffing as the artist. I feel like a lot of the stuff with the artist, there's not actually that much to say because it's so flexible. You can do like literally anything with it, but that almost makes it so that like we don't have to talk about it because it's kind of obvious. Just like, use it to bluff the most useful
But then like
information.
you're the artist and you're like, I can do anything. I don't know what to do. I'll just Vortox check, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, don't just calm down, take a breath, wait a little bit, see where your info's heading, try and confirm some worlds.
Yeah.
Like,
all right, let's move to section 3. Running the artist as the storyteller.
go ahead, Andrew.
All right, yeah. I'll take most of this, but I do want to hear your input. So I think there's a lot of things to consider with the artist, most of which revolve around like the technical aspects of running it in the game. So for instance, when you're asked a question, I think it's important to know that you can ask them to clarify their question if you're ever unsure about it. So if you want them to rephrase it in a different way, just ask them to do it. Make sure you understand what they're asking before you answer it.
Yeah, like repeat it back to them. Like confirm that this is the question they're asking. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's totally okay to do that. It's totally okay to take some time to do that. They might even want you to like spend some time talking to them because maybe they're planning to bluff Savant or something. So don't ever be afraid to ask clarifying questions. I would also say always take a look at the grimoire before you answer. Even if you think you're sure of the answer, then still look at the grimoire because then they aren't going to be able to tell like, oh, this is something that he knew for sure. It's just always a good practice to do that. And yeah, I guess you have the point in here of the artist as being a good twin candidate. I think that's actually something we're going to talk more about in the evil twin episode, as far as running the evil twin, because that's more on that topic. Not that I want to get rid of your only storyteller topic,
I didn't have much to say. It's fine.
it's fine. Yeah, so we'll talk more about that kind of thing in the evil twin episode. One other thing to keep in mind about putting the artist into the bag at all is that the artist if you want it to be, is a strictly better seamstress.
Yeah, because you can just check yourself, and the seamstress can't.
That, and also just, like the artist just can use their ability as exactly the seamstress's ability if they want to. Which is a little bit weird. It's one of the weird things about Clocktower. Most of the time you don't have characters that are just like one is strictly better than another, but this is a weird case where the artist is just a seamstress that is more flexible, if you want to think of it that way.
The only difference I can think of is the artist has to use their ability during the day and the seamstress has to go at night. Right. I'm not sure how much that impacts the game, but that is a difference. Yeah,
that's true. I guess it's technically like a little bit worse to have to use your ability during the day because then everybody sees it happening.
And you're missing out on valuable whispering time, right. I guess.
Yeah.
But so that's really not enough of a downside.
Yeah, I guess it's not fair to say it's strictly better than seamstress, but it's better than seamstress most of the time, I think.
I think it's fair to say it's strictly better than seamstress.
Okay. Yeah. So that is something to keep in mind, and that's not to say that like seamstress is weak by any means, because it turns out that if the artist were to always use their ability as seamstress, it would be pretty powerful. Like that's a pretty powerful baseline. But that is something to keep in mind if you're choosing between putting seamstress and artist in. The artist, I would say, is a strictly better seamstress, but the person has to know how to use it. Like if they're going to go waste their question, then obviously it's not.
Right. I guess the other difference is just the possibility space, right? The artist is scary for some people, and the seamstress is not.
Yeah, it's easier to make an error as the artist, I guess, where you can ask a not useful question. So even though it theoretically, like, I guess that's actually another thing. The artist themselves doesn't know whether or not the seamstress info is going to be super useful right now, whereas the storyteller does. So, like, by putting a seamstress in the game, you're ensuring that ability is what will get used at some point, hopefully, unless they die first. And if you think that ability is going to be particularly useful in the game, then the seamstress could be better than the artist because the artist doesn't know that that's how they should be using their ability.
Yeah, I guess, also when you put an artist in the bag, you're sort of saying, this is something, this is an unknown element that I'm adding to the game. Like, I don't know what the artist is going to ask. It's like giving away some control.
Yeah, and then I guess the last big topic for the storyteller with an artist is when you have a poisoned artist being poisoned by Nodashi. The question of whether or not to give them a true answer to their question. And I think that this is one of the most kind of awkward situations with the Nodashi poisoning, because typically what I like to do with Nodashi poisoning is give some true, some false info. That way it's hard to tell whether or not there's Nodashi. But the artist is a once per game ability, so you only have one shot at doing that.
It might not be a bad idea to ask the Nodashi, what demon are you trying to construct? Like, are you trying to construct a Vortox? Are you trying to construct a Nodashi somewhere else? And then that can really help you when you're trying to give information to poison people, I think.
Yeah,
just like try and figure out what demon the world they're trying to create.
Yeah, and that's another reason that it's good to talk to the storyteller.
Oh my god. If you're the demon and you haven't told the storyteller your bluffs on day 1 of Sects and Violets, you're going to get dreamed and you're going to regret it.
Yeah, so that's a really good point for knowing whether or not to lie to the artist. I think another thing just to keep in mind is just like, how much is this going to tell everyone that there's a Nodashi there? Like, if they ask, am I the artist? And you tell them no, that's telling them obviously it's a Vortox or a Nodashi, and if it's a Nodashi, it's next to them. If you're then giving out true information to everyone else, it might be very obvious that there's just a Nodashi next to them. So
yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's just, you really want to consider that. I'd say the Vortox check is the most of the time I would just tell them, yes, you are the artist if they ask me that. Yeah, I don't know. It's tough. It's situational.
It is. I think lying or not to poisoned players next to the Nodashi is just, I think it's one of the hardest storyteller decisions in Sects and Violets. Like, because that can just pinpoint the demon right away.
Yeah, I guess the other big thing with the artist question is, if they ask me something that I feel like it'll be very easy for them to confirm, then I'll just give them the truth, for 2 reasons. Because one is that since it's easy to confirm, if they figure out that it was a lie, then it's going to pinpoint the Nodashi. And the other thing is, well, if it's easy for them to confirm it anyway, then like me telling them the truth doesn't actually give them that much more information, so it's not that bad. So I guess that's kind of my metric, but it's a hard decision. All right, any final thoughts on the artist?
No, I think we hit all the things.
All of the things.
We've
asked all of the questions.
If you think of another great artist question that we didn't talk about, let us know, because
yes,
we're curious.
If there's any other logical tricks like the ones we talked about, also I want to hear those. Maybe not necessarily for Vortox proofing, but I don't know if there's anything else you can think of that gets you particularly useful info. But yeah. All right, thank you for talking to me, Kohava.
Thanks for having me on.
To the listener, thank you for listening. And you'll hear from me and another special guest in another 2 weeks.